king, and that's what they were doing, and that's the warning from the book of Judges.
Let's start in verse 1. Now it came about in those days, there was no king in Israel, just like we said before. But there was a certain Levite staying in the remote part of the hill country of Ephraim, who took a concubine for himself from Bethlehem in Judah. But his concubine played the harlot against him, and she went away from him to her father's house in Bethlehem in Judah, and was there for a period of 4 months.
Okay. So, Adam's going to go on about that. That verse 2 where it says she played the harlot against him, the Hebrew word for harlot also can be, she found him repugnant. So, the Hebrew word can mean a multitude of things.
Yeah.
But it could be that it was as simple as they had an argument and they separated, or it could be that she did something playing the harlot to him. Whatever the case, we know that they had an argument to the point that they separated from one another. And, we're not going to go into, we'll spend 10 minutes on that if we tried to. So go ahead.
All right, so we're going to summarize real quick. So she's down in Bethlehem with her father. After 4 months, the Levite decides to chase after his concubine, and he arrives at the home of his father-in-law, and tradition dictates he receives 3 days of hospitality. So food, drink, warm welcome. At the end of the 3rd day, the Levite's ready to go home, take his concubine with him. And his father-in-law and his concubine say, hold on a second, stay around for an extra day. This is atypical. This is going above and beyond from a hospitable standpoint. And so he sticks around for a 4th day. And then a 5th day rolls around. He wakes up early on the 5th day and says, I'm ready to go. And his concubine and his father-in-law once again say, stay, eat, drink, relax. And so he does for the majority of the 5th day. And then in the afternoon of the 5th day, he's finally ready to go. And he sets off towards Ephraim.
Adam, let's back up for a minute. What is a concubine?
Okay. Oh, why do I have to answer that?
Well, but they refer to her father being his father-in-law.
Yeah.
Later on in chapter 20 or 21, he's going to be referred to as her husband. So what is a concubine?
So a concubine is a female that is not married to the man, right?
She's not?
She's not. So doesn't enjoy the benefits of a marriage relationship, but does enjoy the benefits of being a concubine. So if we go back to, I think, Genesis or Exodus?
Exodus 21, 7 through 11.
There's examples.
Deals with the laws of how a concubine's to be treated.
They're to be treated, they're supposed to be given food, they're supposed to be given a place in the household, but not the same standing as a wife.
Yeah. Another way you could look at it, a concubine, this was an age when they were polygamous. A lot of times that polygamy had a reason. If your wife could not bear you any children, you were allowed to take a concubine to provide you with children, to further your heritage and so forth. But another way to look at this, a concubine was a secondary wife in this time of polygamy. She was commonly taken from slaves that you had purchased or slaves that you had taken captive, in a battle. And so that's a lot of times how you got a concubine compared to the fact that you got a wife from maybe among your tribe and so forth. And the other important thing is they could be more easily put away than a wife. The rules were not near as strict to put away a concubine as they were to put away your first wife, but they were, in a lot of ways, in a lot of respects, treated like a wife. So a lot of times people get the mistaken impression, well, a concubine is just really another name for a harlot or a prostitute. That's not the case at all. A concubine was a member of your household. It's just they were taken, you look at the case of Hagar. She was a concubine of Abraham. You look at the case of Bilhah. You look at the case of Gideon. He had a concubine. So there are lots of examples before we get, here to this example. This example where we have concubines. And they did have recognized rights that were guarded by the Mosaic law.
The
like
other
we
point to
mentioned.
mention here is she's not of the people. She's not an Israelite. She's going to be a foreigner. Her father-in-law is a foreigner. And this is something to keep in mind. His father-in-law has showed him literally 5 days of hospitality when tradition dictated he'd only get 3 days. And it's going to be important because the Levite and his concubine and his servant are going to be looking for hospitality as they travel back home. And they're not going to be able to find it. But we're starting off this story with more hospitality than is required. And from a foreigner.
So that brings us now to verse 10 of chapter 19. And before I start, where was?
Looking for the map. It's in
Next slide. The next one, but
Next slide.
I was looking for the passage that talks about something. But okay, so these are some of the events that we've got numbered here that we're going to be looking at. The first event that we've got circled, number 1, he was in Bethlehem. That's where his concubine's father lived, his father-in-law. That's where he had gone after 4 months of her having returned home after their argument or after her being unfaithful to him, whatever the case may have been. But he went back to win her back, and she seemed to accept that. She was willing to go back with him after 5 days, and they had to go by Jabus, which later became Jerusalem, but now was a city of Jebusites. And so they left so late because of the hospitality on that 5th day. It was coming on late in the afternoon. Between Bethlehem and Jabus was, I think that's roughly 6 miles. So they covered that, with the 2 donkeys, him and his servant and his concubine. They got to Jabus, and he decides, we are not going to stop here because these are not Israelites. We're going to go on to an Israelite town. We're going to stop either at Gibeah or we're going to stop at Ramah. And Gibeah was a Benjamite town. And so they got to Gibeah, and they couldn't get any farther. They couldn't make Ramah because the night was falling. And so they go into the city, and that's where we're at now in verse 10. And you may want to turn to that in your Bible. I'm not going to be able to read that up there very well. My eyes are not that good anymore. But it says, "But the man was not willing to spend the night, so he arose and departed and came to the place opposite Jabus." So this was poor planning on the part of the Levite. As they were with him, a pair of saddle donkeys, his concubine also was with him. When they were near Jabus, the day was almost gone. The servant said to his master, "Please come and let us turn into the city." They decided not to. They went on. They stopped. Verse 16. So they got to Gibeah. They went into the city square. Then behold, an old man was coming out of the field from his work at evening. Now the man was from the hill country of Ephraim, which is where this Levite was from. So they were, from the same area. And he was sojourning there. He was working there. He actually had an abode there. He was not a Benjamite, though. And he saw the traveler in the open square of the city, and the old man said, "Where are you going, and where do you come from?" And he said, "We are passing from Bethlehem in Judah to the remote part of the hill country of Ephraim, for I am from there. And I went to Bethlehem in Judah, and I am now going to my house, and no man will take us into his house. Yet there is both," and then he goes on to say, "I've got all the provisions we need. We just need a place to stay." And so the old man agrees. I don't know if we've got that in the future verses or not. But what we have here is Benjamin's town of Gibeah is an inhospitable town, which that was part of the Mosaic law. They were to be hospitable to other Israelites, whether they were from their tribe or not, and they decided not to be hospitable. So that's the first sin that we're going to heap upon the Benjamites. It's a minor one compared to some of the other ones, but still they were guilty of that. And, and the problem was, the interesting thing was that for them to show hospitality wouldn't have cost them anything, because the Levite had everything that he needed, even to feed his donkeys. All he needed was a place to stay. And nobody would take him in. And then you have this hospitable old man from Ephraim. and he provides him a place to stay for the night, and he shows hospitality when none of the Benjamites would.
Now, to an Israelite reading this account, it's going to echo what we hear in Exodus 18, Genesis 18. Lot. When Lot is in Sodom, he comes across two men at the gate that are angels. And he's like, what are you doing here? And they said, well, we're planning on staying in the city center for the night. And he begs them, please, come to my house, let me feed you, let me wash your feet. You look at 21. So he, the old man, took them into his house, gave the donkeys fodder, and they washed their feet, and they ate and drank. It's a very similar activity that Lot does with these two angels. The point being, we're drawing clear lines between Sodom, which we all know what Sodom was. We know Sodom was destroyed, with Gibeah. And this next account, while disturbing, is very similar to what we read in that passages about Sodom and Lot.
Okay.
All right. So while they were celebrating, behold, the men of the city, certain worthless fellows, surrounded the house, pounding the door. And they spoke to the owner of the house, the old man, saying, bring out the man who came into your house, that we may have relations with him. Same thing happened with Lot. Men came to the door and asked for the two angels, the two men that were in Lot's house. 23. Then the man, the owner of the house, went out to them and said to them, no, my fellows, please do not act so wickedly. Since this man has come into my house, do not commit this act of folly. Lot says almost the exact same thing. Here is my virgin daughter and his concubine. Please let me bring them out to you, that you may ravish them and do with them whatever you wish. But do not commit such an act of folly against this man. But the men would not listen to him. So the man seized his concubine, that's the Levite, seized his concubine, brought her out to them, and they raped her and abused her all night until morning, and let her go at the approach of dawn. As the day began to dawn, the woman came and fell down at the doorway of the man's house, where her master was, until full daylight. Now, not a great story, but the point is we're drawing direct correlation between what happened in Sodom and a Hebrew city. Sodom and Gomorrah was a Canaanite city. It was not a city founded by God. Here is Gibeah, which was supposed to be an Israelite city, behaving the same way Sodom and Gomorrah did.
It illustrates how low they had fallen, in this cycle of turning away from God. And we don't have a judge that's turning them back now. And it's just gotten, they're reprehensible. Now, it's going to be interesting. You see, that the first thing they want the Levite. They don't want the women. These Benjamites are wanting to commit homosexual acts. And the Levite, in retelling this story to the rest of Israel, is going to leave that part out. He's just going to say, look at this reprehensible thing they did to my concubine. He's going to leave out the fact that he offered up his concubine to save himself. He leaves that part out. So, the Levite is not without sin either, I don't think, in this story. We don't really have anybody without sin in this story. I think that's reprehensible too on his part, that he was willing to do that. The old man, now he took hospitality to the nth degree, because he was even willing to offer his virgin daughter to these men to save somebody he had just known for hours. And yet he was willing to do that, but the men of Benjamin weren't interested in her. Okay.
All right, let's get past this real quick. When her master got up in the morning and opened the door of the house and went out to go out on his way, then behold, his concubine was lying at the doorway of the house with her hands on the threshold. And he said to her, get up and let's go. But there was no answer. Then he put her on the donkey, and the man set out and went home. When he entered his house, he took a knife, seized his concubine, and cut her into 12 pieces, limb by limb, and then sent them throughout the territory of Israel. All who saw it said, nothing like this has ever happened or been seen from the day when the sons of Israel came up from the land of Egypt to this day. Consider it, make a plan, and speak up. And this is the conflict. This is the point of decision in these last three chapters of Judges.
We don't know what letters he may have sent out with these pieces, but when it says nothing like this has been seen, it could be referring to his letter that these men, what they had done to his concubine, or they could be also referring to the fact that nobody has ever cut up a human before in Israel. That was an unspeakable thing in itself. But he was trying to do something that would get everybody's attention. And oh, did he do that? He had 400,000 men respond to the call of sending these pieces throughout the country. But still, you look at the Mosaic Law, and they even buried their enemies. That was a requirement of the law. You did not do this to a human body, because a human body was made in the image of God, and they held that sacred. And so a concubine, that should have never, ever happened. But so again, I think the Levite is committing an unspeakable thing, but he did get a reaction to it that he was wanting. So again, it shows the depths of the despair that they were falling to, I think.
Another thing to point out here is we don't have names. We aren't like the judges where we're going to honor the judge with Gideon or Ehud. These people are nameless. But there's a point to that. Why are they nameless, Dad?
Well, we're not sure of the point, but it's like, you've got a Levite, and this Levite calls for an army, and 400,000 people show up. You would think they would know his name, and I think they did know his name. But the point of the person telling the story in Judges is the names aren't important in this story. The name of the concubine wasn't important. The name of the Ephraimite wasn't important. The name of the Levite wasn't important. They all stood for the depth of the sin that the people as a whole had fallen to. And they didn't want the people to be able to assign and say, this one person was awful. Because at that time, it was probably being implied that all Levites were not serving God in the right way, and all of them were evil. That the Benjamites, it wasn't just a couple of men, but we're going to see that later on. Anyway.
Yeah, it's not a coincidence that previously we've talked about the hill country of Ephraim. We talked about Micah and his idols. We talked about the Levite, and we're back in the hill country of Ephraim. We're back with a Levite. All right, these are not coincidences. We're trying to tell a story, and the tribes that they're in, the countries they're in, the locations they travel are these threads that are trying to connect all this story together.
Yeah, they it's pointing out the fact of what has the nation sunk to when they're without a king and when they don't even look at God as their king, and they're basically have become godless at this point, the way they're behaving. So now then we're going to go on to chapter 20. So he sends out this message, this terrible message. Then all the sons of Israel from Dan to Beersheba, and I'll go back to that passage in a minute, but remember last week, the tribe of Dan, moved from their territory here and went up and took over this city that was a city of Sidonians, and they defeated and killed all the Sidonians, and they rebuilt the city, and they renamed it Dan. So when it says all the people from Dan to Beersheba, basically it's saying the entire nation of Israel is what he's saying. Dan to Beersheba would be like us saying, everything in the dictionary from A to Z.
Or Alaska to Florida.
That's what they're saying there. Even though Maine is farther east than Florida. But anyway, that's a side note.
All 50 states.
So, when all the sons of Israel from Dan to Beersheba, including the land of Gilead, came out, and the congregation assembled as one man to the Lord at Mizpah. Now, Mizpah is also where Saul is going to assemble all the people, but I'll make some, if we have time, draw some comparisons to that later over in, that's in 1 Samuel. The chiefs of all the people, even of all the tribes of Israel, took their stand in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 foot soldiers who drew the sword. Now the sons of Benjamin heard that the sons of Israel had gone up to Mizpah, and the sons of Israel said, "Tell us, how did this wickedness take place?" So they're just wanting to punish the wicked ones, the ones that had been responsible for the gang rape and the murder of this concubine. Turn over those men to us. We will punish them, and then we will all turn back to God. So the Levite, the husband of the woman who was murdered, I got ahead of myself because that's going to happen later on.
Yep.
I'm sorry. So the Levite, the husband of the woman who was murdered, answered and said, "I came with my concubine to spend the night at Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. But the men of Gibeah rose up against me and surrounded the house at night. Because of me, they intended to kill me." So see, he's kind of changed the story a little bit there. They've intended to kill me. Instead, they ravished my concubine so that she died. And I took hold of her and cut her into pieces and sent her throughout the land of Israel's inheritance, for they have committed a lewd and disgraceful act in Israel. Behold, all the sons of Israel, give your advice and counsel here. So he got the intended results. He had all the people turn out, and yet he does not tell the disgraceful things that they planned to do to him, just what they did to his concubine. But he did result in one thing: he united Israel. And such a thing's never been seen before. And the tribes of Israel did some soul searching, and they had to turn to God to seek answers for how this evil could exist in Israel. So they are going to go to the place where the Ark of the Covenant was, and where...
We'll get there.
Yeah.
We'll get there. All right, but there's the map. So they're at Mizpah, just to the left of number 2. Okay, they're not very far away from the scene of the crime. So it makes sense that Benjamin knows what's going on. The tribe does. All right, so verses 12 through 17. Then the tribes of Israel sent men throughout the entire tribe of Benjamin, saying, "What is the wickedness that has taken place among you?" So they're actually going to go interrogate the tribe. "Now then, deliver up the men, the worthless fellows of Gibeah, that they may be put to death, and remove this wickedness from Israel." Okay? So far, this has been pretty sensible. Let's find the people guilty and punish the people guilty. But the sons of Benjamin would not listen to the voice of their brothers, the sons of Israel. The sons of Israel being all of the other tribes. This is not just the Levites. This is all of the other tribes talking to Benjamin. The sons of Benjamin gathered from the cities of Gibeah to go out to battle against the sons of Israel. From the cities on that day, the sons of Benjamin were numbered 26,000 men who draw the sword, besides the inhabitants of Gibeah, who were numbered 700 choice men. Out of all of these, 700 choice men were left-handed. Each one could use a sling and could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. Then the men of Israel, besides Benjamin, were numbered 400,000 men who drew the sword. All of these were men of war. Now, they get together at Mizpah. They have a verdict that they need to punish the men that did it. Benjamin's not going to listen, so it's going to end up being they're going to punish the entire tribe of Benjamin. What we do find in chapter 21, in retrospect, is they've also made a couple of vows. And we know how vows go with Japheth. One of the vows was, none of us will give his daughter in marriage to a Benjamite. None of us. The entire other brother or the sons of Israel are not going to be giving their sons or their daughters to a Benjamite. The second one is, anyone who failed to assemble before the Lord at Mizpah, who failed to answer the call, will be put to death. That this is a serious and heinous act. Everyone needs to take it seriously, and people that don't show up, there's going to be consequences. And those consequences are going to show up in chapter 21. But I say that now because they're said in retrospect. But you need to know, while they're at Mizpah, they made those two vows. All right, so as the men selected to compromise, the army of Israel marches to confront Gibeah. Gibeah, they make that appeal. They want to purge that specific evil. Benjamin is defiant.
They're just too prideful and too stubborn. They're not going to give up any of their tribe, no matter what their crime.
And so we enter the first battle in this civil war between Benjamin and everyone else.
So we're still in chapter 20. Now the sons of Israel rose. They went up to Bethel. There's going to be 3 battles that are going to take place. They inquired of God and said, "Who shall go up first for us to battle against the sons of Benjamin?" This reminds us of chapter 1 of Judges, when they went in, they were in the land, and they said, "Who should go up first?" And they said, "Judah will go up first." And then the Lord said, "Judah shall go up first here also." So they were to lead the 400,000. So the sons of Israel arose in the morning and camped against Gibeah. The men of Israel went out to battle against Benjamin, and the men of Israel arrayed for battle against them at Gibeah. Then the sons of Benjamin came out of Gibeah and felled to the ground on that day 22,000 men of Israel. So they killed 22,000 of the Israelites. We don't know how many of the Benjamites are killed, except the accountant in me does some math later on, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. So go ahead.
And so the second battle. But the people, the men of Israel, encouraged themselves and arrayed for battle again in the place where they had arrayed themselves the first day. The sons of Israel went up and wept before the Lord until evening and inquired of the Lord. If you go back to 18, Dad. They went up to Bethel. When it says they go up and inquire of the Lord,
Bethel's where the ark was.
They're going to Bethel. They're going to where, like we see in Samuel, they see God. Where the Ark of the Covenant is, they think there is God, so they're going to Bethel. They're inquiring before God at Bethel. And they do it again here in 22. So let me continue on. The sons of Israel went up and wept before the Lord. When they went up, they went to Bethel. Until evening, inquired of the Lord, "Shall we draw near for battle against the sons of my brother Benjamin?" And the Lord said, "Go up against them." All right. Second try. And God says to go. 24. Then the sons of Israel came again to the sons of Benjamin the second day. Benjamin went out against them from Gibeah the second day and fell to the ground again. 18,000 men of the sons of Israel. All these drew the sword.
Okay. So that's 40,000 from the nation of Israel that have died in these 2 battles. Now, the Benjamites started with 26,700. We're going to see that 600 are going to survive, so that's got us down to 26,100. And there's 25,000 that die in the 3rd battle, which leaves us 1,100 Benjamites that had probably most likely died in these first 2 battles. So 40,000 Israelites, 1,100 Benjamites. The Israelites aren't going to be able to take those kind of odds for very long, even though they did start with 400,000 men. They did go and inquire of the Lord, but the Lord in the first 2 battles never once said, "You will be victorious." So we're going to talk about that later. Why did it take them 3 battles? But now we come to the 3rd battle. Then the sons of Israel and all the people went up and came to Bethel and wept. So they went back to Bethel. They were where the ark was, where Phinehas was, the priest. And they remained there before the Lord and fasted that day until evening. So they're fasting. They're making supplication to the Lord. They offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. The sons of Israel inquired of the Lord, for the ark of the covenant of God was there in those days. And Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, Aaron's son, stood before it to minister in those days, saying, Shall I yet again go out to battle against the sons of my brother Benjamin, or shall I cease? And the Lord said, Go up, for tomorrow I will deliver them into your hand. This time he says, you will be victorious. He didn't say that the first 2 times, okay? So now God is guaranteeing victory. And it looks like from their reaction to the second battle that maybe finally their hearts have turned back to God. God was not going to give them a victory until they were ready to turn to God. And they've done that here in this 3rd battle. And so now God says, he doesn't say this, but it's kind of implied. Finally, you've gotten my message. Finally, you're doing the right thing for the right purpose. now you can have victory. It's cost you 40,000 men, but
And we're at the point now, what's interesting is these three battles, we're seeing similarities at the very beginning of Judges when Judah's called to go up first. That was against the people of Canaan. Now we're called up to go against our own countrymen, our own nation in the tribe of Benjamin. We finally have wholeheartedly involved ourselves in holy war against evil, but unfortunately, it's against our own people and not the people that were inhabiting Canaan when we first started this journey, when we first entered Canaan. Yeah, you already mentioned Judah should go first. You got it. Yeah, next one.
okay. So, why 3 battles? I've kind of implied. Why did God allow the Benjamites to overcome Israel in the first battle? It may be that God uses the battles to work on the hearts of the Israelites. That's what I'm implying here. The first battle woke them up to the gravity of civil war. You know, we're killing our own people here. And so that's why before the second battle, they went up to God and said, do we continue to attack the Benjamites? You know, they're Israelites. Do we continue to attack them? And he says, yes, go and attack them. So then they attack them a second time and lose. And so then they go to God, what's going on here? I'm paraphrasing. What's going on here? Why are we losing? But they go to God with peace offerings. They go to God with fasting. And because of this change of their heart, then God says, go a third time and attack them and you'll be victorious. And so they set some men in ambush around the city, 10,000 men that the Benjamites don't see. They draw them out. Some of the men run away so that the Benjamites follow them. These 10,000 men set upon the city. Then these men, when they get out so far, the 10,000 set fire to the city. They turn around and see there's the smoke coming up from their city. So they turn around to run back. And that's when all of the Israelites come out and pursue them and kill 18,000 in one place, 2,000 in another place, 5,000 in another place. They kill a total of 25,000 of them. I think 1,100 of them had died earlier in the first 2 battles. That left only 600 that remained. And those 600 ran up to the Rock of Rimmon. And evidently that's a place that they could fortify and protect themselves because they stayed there for 4 months and they never went in to attack them. But the other thing too is Israel realized not only did they do that, but once they destroyed that city, they went around to every single Benjamite city and burned it down and killed the women and children in those cities. They wiped out every Benjamite except these 600 men. No women, no children, no other Benjamite men were alive at the end of this series of battles. I don't know how to justify that other than they just, they tried to just punish the men that were responsible for the sin in Gibeah. The men of Benjamin united together and said, no, we're too stubborn, we're too prideful, we are going to stand together against the rest of Israel. And they would not give in, and so that was the consequence. Dan.
So the longer that we let sin reign, the harder the purging and the harder to take care of it. And the whole nation was at fault.
Yeah.
Judah and Simeon and all the other tribes, they didn't say, hey, you guys are getting out of hand, because they probably had their own things that they were justifying and letting go. And man, I tell you, one of the scariest passages I know is Hebrews 12, that the Lord disciplines those that he loves. And this is a terrible lesson in God's discipline on these tribes. And obviously, Benjamin got the worst of it because the most evil was found in that tribe. And just like so many times God only saved a remnant, that's exactly what happens with this tribe of Benjamin.
Thank you. Good point. Excellent point.
Art, I just wanted to go back to the reason why all this happens. And it seems like it talks about the 700 choice fighters that they had, and then it references later the 700 choice fighters seem to be from Gibeah. So it could be that that's the reason why these men are brazen enough to go ahead and go after this Levite. But then it might also be the reason why the Benjamites are not giving those people up. They're afraid of them. So they haven't taken care of business in their own. That's kind of like Dan said. Benjamin is at fault for having bad leadership.
Dana makes an excellent point, because we got the coincidence of, is it a coincidence that there's 700 fighting men in Gibeah and there's 700 that are slingers that can hit, a hair from however far away? If those are the same, then I think Dana's point is excellent. They were probably afraid of Gibeah, and they probably thought Gibeah was their leading soldiers, and they weren't willing to turn them over. But the point is, if you catch sin early, it's a lot easier to deal with. And I think that's the point Dan was making. And they have let sin go for so long, and it has gotten so deep. And we like to look at this and we say, they wiped out an entire tribe. How could they do that? And that tribe did this terrible thing, and how could they do that? And we live in America. We say we're a Christian nation. How many children were aborted this year in this country? Sometimes I think we're not very far from the Benjamites and from the Israelites when they have turned from God and they have looked after their own wisdom and saw fit to do as they saw fit without a king. Okay.
So not only is this a holy war against the wicked tribe of Benjamin, it's also a holy war for the hearts of Israel. It takes this wickedness and confronting this wickedness, losing their brothers in war, to actually have them turn to God at Bethel, offer the appropriate sacrifices, and ask God for help. And we see that again in chapter 21.
Now, chapter 21, we knew we were going to be running out of time, so we didn't put it up here. You're going to have to read chapter 21. We're going to try and paraphrase it as we go along here. But what happens is they've destroyed all the cities of Benjamin. They've destroyed everything in Benjamin except for 600 men. And so now Israel grieves them. Why should this tribe be missing from Israel today? Maybe we've overstepped our bounds. And the thing is, in chapter 20, you see lots of turning back to God and lots of reference to God. Chapter 21, you're not going to see any turning towards God to ask Him for guidance. You're not going to see any mention of God, really. Chapter 21, they say, how can we make this up to the Benjamites? So they go to those 600 men and they said, you don't have any women. And by the way, we made a vow that we can't give you our wives, so you can't take our women. We can't offer our women as your wives. But another vow we made was if anybody didn't show up for this battle, we were going to punish them. And the people that didn't show up were the people of Jabesh Gilead. So they sent an army of 12,000 men up there and destroyed everybody in Jabesh Gilead for not showing up and battling. Everybody except for the virgin women. The women that were wives they killed, the men, all the men they killed, everybody else they killed, except they left those 400 virgin women of that city and brought them back to the Benjamites. But wait a minute, we got 600 Benjamites, we got 400 women, and what are we going to do here?
We have a deficit of 200 wives.
Yeah. So then they say, we can't give them our wives, but we can give them permission to take wives. So they tell the Benjamites, we have this annual festival that goes on in Shiloh, and the women have a tendency to go out and dance, especially the virgin women, outside the city walls. So you can hide in the vineyards, and you can take up to 200 of these virgin daughters, and we won't give them to you, but if you have to take them, we're not going to say anything. They're being guilty of the same thing that was going on before, but that's how they get 600 women for the Benjamites. The Benjamites then grow. They rebuild all their cities. If you don't think they rebuild all their cities, Gibeah, the city that they destroyed, the first one that they destroyed, is the city that Saul is from. He was a Benjamite. He was from Gibeah. So it did come back. Jabesh Gilead that was destroyed. One of Saul's first acts as a king, he hears about the Ammonites surrounding Jabesh Gilead. And the Ammonites say, you're going to be our slaves. And they said, well, can we work out something here? And they said, yeah, we will let you be. Well, they were going to kill them all. They said, can we be your slaves? And they said, you can be our slaves, but we'll have to gouge out your right eye. All the men. And they said, will you give us 7 days to see if we can find somebody to go up for us? And so they sent out messengers, and the message came to Gibeah, and Saul was out plowing his field with a yoke of oxen, and he heard this, and he was incensed. Now, he's already been chosen as the king, but he's plowing his field, and he's incensed. So what's he do with his yoke of oxen? He cuts them into pieces and sends them throughout all the nation. And where 400,000 had gathered at Mizpah before, 300,000 gathered to Saul at Mizpah, and he goes up and defeats the Ammonites. In the city, the only city that didn't come against the Benjamites before, he goes up and saves that city. What's become of that city later on. So that's kind of the other part of the story, but that's really nothing to do with our application here. So let's get back to our application, Adam. I get caught up in the excitement of just tying all these stories together in these places and so forth. It's just...
So by the end of the story of Judges, God is no longer sought. They rationalized what they were doing, that they were doing God's will and rescuing a tribe of Israel, and followed ungodly means to get it done. They returned to their own self-determination for living. Let me just read 21, starting in verse 23. And the people of Benjamin did so, and took their wives according to their number from the dancers whom they carried off. Then they went and returned to their inheritance, and rebuilt the towns and lived in them. And the people of Israel departed from there at that time, every man to his tribe and his family, and they went out there, every man to his inheritance. We've gotten back to normalcy. Verse 25. In those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. We haven't learned anything. We've destroyed an entire tribe. We've then destroyed another town. We are plaguing Shiloh, and everyone just goes back to their towns like it didn't happen, and we still have no king in Israel.
The lesson through the book of Judges is that Israel demonstrates this pattern that they only turn to God in times of trouble. They don't honor God when things are good, only when things are bad. And when the crisis is resolved, they go back to doing what they did before. Are we prone to following the same pattern? Do we turn to God more when we have problems than when things are good for us? I think that is a pattern that sometimes we follow as Christians. How does a person miss what does a person miss when he turns to God in his relationship only when he's having problems and difficulties and trials? Do you tend to glorify God in those times or just ask for help? Are you thankful for anything? You're not very thankful for something, you're just wanting help. We miss out on those opportunities when things are going good to be thankful to God, to glorify God, to do the good and positive things in our relationship with God when we only do it that way, when we only turn to God when things are difficult for us. But this story, 19 through 21, it reveals numerous sins of Israel, and what they're going to find out is having the right kind of king could have helped them overcome that. And so that's what's going to come in 1st and 2nd Samuel, but that's for another class.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone, for your attendance and attention. We've really appreciated it. Honestly, Dad and I have really enjoyed teaching this class together, and hopefully you've enjoyed hearing our thoughts on the book of Judges. Thank you very much, everyone.